Welcome to The Being Guide, the lifestyle podcast that celebrates diversity of thought on all things health, wellness, and being. I'm your host, Charlotte Horn. Join me as I indulge my curiosity through candid conversations about health and life, with people who represent a whole spectrum of ideologies on what it means to be well. I'll be finding out what being means to each of them as they generously share their stories and leave us with insights that can be applied in the context of our everyday lives. Together, we seek to make sense of the paradoxes, raise awareness of the resources, and normalize conversations about the things that we are all thinking and feeling. It's not a one-size-fits-all, so take what you need and enjoy the show. Today, we're talking high performance with AFL Academy high performance coach, Paul Sealey. Paul has been working with the AFL for 7 years and is responsible for the development and delivery of the AFL and AFL Women's National Talent High Performance Program. Prior to working in the AFL, Paul was the strength and conditioning coach at Texas A&M University, where he held the role for 14 years across a range of different sports. He's also worked at Eastern Rangers FC and was a lecturer at Australian Catholic University. Today, Paul and I will be talking about his role as a high-performance manager and how we can apply some of these high-performance principles in the context of our daily lives. We'll also touch on the evolution of mental health in sport and the additional impact that COVID has had on this. Paul Sealey, great to have you on the podcast. Thanks for joining.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Hopefully we're all feeling refreshed and optimistic. We're just a couple of weeks into the new year and hopefully going to build some high performance habits that can carry us through to hopefully less of a shit show.
Not a lot less COVID restrictions and a lot more happier life for everyone.
Yes. Well, we can all but hope. It's still slightly shambolic out there at the moment, but fingers crossed we'll forge ahead. Cool. Let's jump straight into it, Paul. So if you could tell us a bit about yourself and your journey into the world of high performance coaching.
Yeah, so I've had a bit of a, like most people, you sort of come into the industry in different ways. I was an elite swimmer growing up and was always wanted to be involved in sport and coaching. Initially sort of got into swim coaching, but I got into the academic side of things in terms of exercise science, did an honours year at ACU, and decided I was going to go the academic route. And part of that was that I needed to go overseas and do a master's or PhD. And I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship at Texas A&M and do some sort of teaching in their kinesiology department while started a PhD and decided I want to get stuck in a lab killing rats. So I ended up just doing a master's. But while I was doing that, I was working the human performance side, working in the gym. And to me, it was testing, training, reevaluating, retesting, and that was human performance at its purest. And because I came from a swimming background, a coaching background, they pretty much handed over the swimming and diving teams to me straight away. And working in America, I had a unique Australian accent and I had a pretty strong coaching background. I took all the sort of first year football players when they first came into the program and taught them the basic fundamentals of the lifts before they sort of integrated into the programs. And I did that on a volunteer basis. I was working full-time lecturing after I finished my master's and as well as working part-time in the weight room. I spent so many hours there, they ended up just offering me a job. And I was fortunate enough to spend almost 14 years working as an assistant and as a senior strength conditioning coach at Texas A&M and working with amazing athletes from all around the world, Olympic caliber and national caliber athletes. So very, very fortunate. 7 years ago, decided to make a move home to Australia, where I'm originally from. And was fortunate enough to pick up a couple of different roles, working with AFL Vic, and then now working my current role at the AFL, looking after the talent pathways, sort of from a sports science and strength and conditioning perspective.
Nice. That's quite a colourful background you've got there. So let's kind of zoom in on your current role a little bit. So the high performance management of the AFL Academy, what kind of does that role entail?
Look, it's a multifaceted role. I wear a lot of different hats. It's essentially what I do from AFL House is I manage the pathways nationally. So I actually have high performance managers in each of the state that I look after and sort of mentor, and we look after development. So it's putting in a curriculum and minimum standards of what we want from physical performance. It's monitoring GPS loads and providing GPS data for all the AFL clubs. So essentially I work for the 18 AFL clubs that are above me and then facilitating all the states and all the clubs and all the schools underneath. I run all the combine training, so that's setting up all their physical battery of testing, their interviews, and the psychometric testing that also goes along with that. And again, it's sort of a multifaceted. We also have what we call the National Academy, where it's the elite 60 players, sort of 30 female, 30 male players, where I get to do a little bit more hands-on coaching and mentoring throughout the year. And we also have an AMS system, which is an athlete management system, where we do a daily wellness check and a load, and that's also where we track all of our injuries. It's quite difficult from some when I've got players spread out across the country from a well-being perspective, but because they do a daily wellness, and it's about a 20-second survey they fill in every day, that if something's flagged, I can reach out to one of my staff members around the country, whether that's in the well-being or coaching or strength conditioning, just to touch base with them and see how they're going and make sure there's no issues. And we do the same thing from a medical perspective and training perspective as well.
That's awesome. That's really good to know that the mental health of the players is kind of a top priority. Is there kind of more of a focus on the physical or the mental health side of things these days, would you say?
Look, the last 12, 18 months with COVID that's hit, there's been and even prior to that, there's actually been a massive change in mindset within the AFL and the AFL industry. So there's actually been a lot more investment in the mental health side of things. We can see that in just the amount of employees that have started the AFL or AFL Clubland, and even within our talent pathway. So I'm really fortunate to work closely with our wellbeing team that set up, obviously, when there's issues going on, but they also do a lot of education around stress management, how to manage social media, all the different components. And just as an adolescent going through life, just putting some different, and obviously there was the challenges of COVID and players not being able to perform in front of recruiters and all the anxiety that goes along with that. So there's been a massive shift and a massive investment, which is talking with the players and the coaches and all the staff around the country. It's been really refreshing, and having those resources there has been invaluable for the AFL.
Yeah, I can imagine it has. With, as you said, you've got these kids at such a pivotal age of their development, and just trying to embed as many good mental health practices as possible into their ways of life it's really good to know that kind of work is going on.
And most of these athletes we're working with are highly driven athletes that sometimes they're so singularly focused on making it to the AFL or AFLW. So it's just sometimes it's as simple as just putting what is plan B and putting some strategies in place that if things don't come to fruition, what else can we do? And that it's not that sort of be all and end all.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. And that's what makes these athletes elite, is that they are so driven, but it's just trying to find that balance for them and find coping mechanisms when they are dealing with stress. How do they cope with that?
Yeah, of course. In your experience, do you see a correlation between high performance and mental health? So, would you say that kind of high performance and happiness can coexist, or is the nature of high performance that you do have to just be so dedicated and so motivated all of the time that it kind of leaves little room for any other kind of aspects of your life?
It's hard to sort of put a blanket. This is what it is, because dealing with so many different athletes, people can compartmentalize or put it in different ways. But overall, I think if you're fortunate enough to make it an AFL system, you might be a professional athlete for 3.5 years. It's what happens after that, and being able to put some strategies in place about just having life skills and moving forward. But what I found is that some of the most successful are highly driven, and whether that's, and you see that in when I was fortunate enough to work with a lot of female athletes in the US, they were high achievers in the classroom, they were high achievers outside the classroom, and they were really, really driven. Sometimes it's getting them to just take a break and have a laugh, and having that balance where sometimes the male athletes, you just point them in the direction and they go. And that can be a blanket one. It's just a matter of to me, it's understanding your athletes. And I think that's really, really important, whether they're male or female. It's just finding out what buttons to push, what support mechanisms you might need to put in. I was fortunate enough to work with a Uruguayan Olympic swimmer, but he's stressed his whole life, just about making teams and doing that. And I could see him just going in a spiral. And I tried to explain to him about your body releases cortisol, and we've got to find a way. And so he got on looking for cortisol blockers. I was like, no, that's not what I'm saying. I was like, we need to find some mechanisms for you to meditate, to relax, and to focus. And we started working on a few little intricacies. And this was sort of before mental health was sort of at the forefront of what the industry is. Just as a strength coach, I was a life coach as well, being that working in the college system, a lot of more.
Oh, wow.
Well, it's not. I didn't have the title life coach, but you think about it, when you're in college, a lot of these athletes are moving away from home. are living on campus, and sometimes they just need someone to vent to. And when you're
Yeah.
stretching them, you're on the ground doing different things, or sometimes they just see you as a little bit of a mentor. And I think that's an important part of being a coach, is being personable as well, that they can actually feel open enough to express some of their feelings or what's going on in their life. And again, as a coach, you've got to know your athletes, when you can push them, when you can't. You've got to
Yeah.
know during exam time when they're highly stressed and agitated that, okay, if they're being a little bit short today, you might let that slide, but there's other times where you just got to call them out on it.
And so how do you really get to know your athletes? Like, what kind of assessments, how do you get to know them, and how much, I guess, do you tailor your approach per athlete?
Well, I got some good advice when I was sort of a young coach, is that sometimes strength coaches, and that's what I started out in the industry, they'd just be in the weight room. That's all this, and so that it was really hard for the athlete. So I started just making sure I'd go to training sessions, I'd go to competitions, I invested in my athletes, and that came back twofold. I don't need to be their best friend. But my goal as a coach is I want to be respected. And then even just simple things of bringing my families to events and different things, just to show the personal side of me, that I'm not just this coach that stands there with a whistle and sunglasses and say, you need to do this. So just being that personal, and making sure the athletes know that there's times to joke and be personal, and there's times to get some work done.
Yeah, because you really would need to build up that level of connection with each of your players, because I mean, they must come from like a fairly, broad range of backgrounds. They've got different motivations, drivers, got different cognitive biases. They've got, limiting beliefs. They're all coming at things from a slightly different perspective. So how do you kind of manage to get all of these different personalities and skill sets and capabilities and get them to cohesively work together as an effective team?
Oh, look, that's a really good and difficult question to answer. And again, I was sort of fortunate working in the college athletics, particularly the football team, is just the diversity within the team. You had some from very affluent backgrounds, and then some that parents may not have been around, or living paycheck to paycheck and really struggling, and having a college scholarship may have been the opportunity to move out. But it was, to me, it's just treating someone with respect, educating them what you're going to do, and as long as the athlete knows that you've got their best interest. So if you're correcting their technique, you might say, look, you're going to hurt yourself if you continue doing this, and this is going to make you a better athlete if we can do A, B, C, D, and getting them to buy in on what we're trying to do. I think that's the biggest thing, is that showing them respect and educating them so they can buy into the program. And once you've got that, they'll 90% of the time they'll buy in. You're always going to have one or two that but that's just the art of coaching, and finding what buttons to press, and how to, and if they actually want to get better, because some athletes are just there and they don't want to get better, and they think they know best, and that's fine too.
So what do you do in those situations? Like, so for example, if you had a player who was extremely talented, like extremely naturally talented, they had all of this kind of natural capability, and they killed it on the pitch, but their mindset was off, their attitude was off, they didn't love it. The kind of best case study that I can think to demonstrate what I'm trying to get at here is the Andre Agassi story, where this guy who dedicated his entire life to a sport and his art, and he honed his craft and arguably was one of the best in the world, but bloody hated it. Like, what would you do in that situation if you had a player that was like that? Would you kind of think of the greater good of the team and be like, oh, well, I suppose from a capability and a winning perspective, this dude is really killing it? Or would you kind of say, look, you need to go and actually find what it is your purpose is, because you'll just spend your life miserable? Like, how do you navigate that as a coach?
No, look, and that's the art of coaching. You don't get this in a manual. It's just probably just comes down to experience. So you've got to sort of ask yourself a few questions. One, is the person being disruptive to the team? So let's say they're doing everything they need to do. They're being respectful. They're just maybe not putting the effort in. And I'm sure you could talk to any coach around the world. They've always seen players that have oodles amount of talent, but they don't have the drive or the desire. And then you get the ones that don't have as much talent, but just so determined. And they're to be honest with you, they're the fun ones to work with, that just find a way to get it done. are they being disrespectful to the team? And if that's the case, then you've got to pull them aside, and you've got to have a few stern conversations. When I worked in college athletics, it's a dog eat dog world. You're on a scholarship, so you've got that lever to pull, that if they're not doing that, you'll find someone just as talented to bring in. So it's a little bit unfortunate. You always have those conversations prior to that with the coaches and the support group, and you try and find out whether they weren't responding to me. They might respond to an athletic trainer. They might respond to an assistant coach, and just finding out what can we do to make them better, and sometimes finding that middle ground. But it's a really challenging, and it's particularly when you're working team, you can't make special considerations. Now, sometimes you can if there's personal things, there's other things going on, but if you start playing favorites, or you can sometimes lose the buy-in of the team. Now, we've got to understand that everyone is different and different needs, and it's even how you give feedback to some people. There might be some athletes that I could give some really direct feedback to, where there's others where I could do it in front of a group, where there's others where I may need to step off to the side and say, hang on, you need to change your attitude in terms of you need to work harder. And it might be I've got to tell them 3 or 4 positive things and then layer a negative thing in there that's going to make them better, or explain to them
sandwich.
why I'm telling you this, because I'm trying to get you to this level and you need to do this and this. And there's others you can call out in front of a group, and then you have your barometers in your team as well. And sometimes if you've built a really good culture as a coach, you don't actually have to call it out, because the captains and the leaders will drag everyone along with them.
What is harder to kind of, I guess, coach or train into somebody? Is it the kind of capability piece, or is it the mindset piece? Which is the harder to train?
To be honest with you, sometimes it's harder to train the ones that want to do too much.
Okay.
They're so determined. Sometimes I find it easy to push someone to get them to a level rather than pull them back. You get some that are just overachievers, and it's really hard for them to understand like load management and stress management and different things like that. And having what we call a down period or an offload week or a recovery week is actually more beneficial for your physical and mental health than just pushing the whole time. So but again, it's a part of that education process, and you can break it through.
Yeah, and how did that go during, the last couple of years, when obviously there's been kind of like a massive halt on certain activities, and in some ways engagement would be pretty hard to foster. Like how did the kind of those players that you were talking about, those real high achieving go really struggle to rest? Like how did you kind of remain engaged with them and try and coach them through a time that was probably particularly challenging for them?
Well and truly, and we sort of had the dynamics in Australia and within the AFL, where some states were playing games all the time. So South Australia and WA last year pretty much had a regular season, or let's say 85-90% season, where Victoria might have had 4 games. And when you've got a 17-year-old and their prime objective is to make AFLW list, and they don't play, they can get really anxious. And it was about explaining to them, this is the plan. We gave them training programs, and we were just articulating that we're going to find a way to get it done. So we were on the back end of the year when things opened up, we were able to run a combine, and they tested really well. We did a training session for them. Again, just trying to find different venues. The fact that they knew that we had their best interest in place. We got recruiters, AFL and AFLW recruiters, to actually explain to them and say, look, we've seen a lot of football from previous years. We changed some of the age groups that we had. So it used to be an under 18 program. So this year it was an under 19 program, just to capture all those players that missed out. We're reverted back to an under 18 program for this coming year. But it was just sort of a one-off reset for the industry, just to give all those athletes an opportunity.
And you kind of have mentioned a couple of times, the anxiety that the players face. And I guess there's kind of a whole myriad of like mental health disorders, which are on the rise, particularly among men and particularly in sports. And there's things like skin folds, which have, induced some kind of shame and body shaming in these athletes. How do you go about creating a program which aims to get the best out of these athletes without pushing them or exacerbating an existing kind of condition?
No, it's sort of a twofold there. As I said, there's been a big investment by the AFL in terms of the wellbeing. So we've got Kate Hall that oversees all the mental health side for the AFL, and I work closely with Nikki Couston, who does a lot of the education and wellbeing. So Nikki has a staff in each of the state, and then under that they have some part-time people, and it was just a matter of putting some education in place. So one, we monitor them through the AMS system. Those wellbeing coordinators have got relationships with all the players and coaches, and they were the ones that were sort of at the front line in the last 12, 18 months with all the COVID issues going on. And they would sort of do just weekly, daily check-ins with the players. The coaches we did a lot of Zoom check-ins, and some of it was as simple as getting a former AFL or AFLW player to come online and just talk to them about life, just so they understand other people are going through similar things. Or it might have been as, yes, we can't play a game, but everyone's going to jump on Friday night. They're going to watch the game on TV. You're going to pick a player, and then you're going to come and provide a report. So we're trying to at least do some education, have some type of interaction with the players. And in terms of the mindset of the coaching is the old days of giving someone a spray and yelling up and down and belittling someone. I think that hopefully they're behind us, and in the pathways in the coach education side of things, it's more about being firm and directive rather than belittling someone. And that's something that's, we sort of pride ourselves on within the talent pathways, is that's what we're trying to do. Because what we've got to remember, the talent pathways, it's not just for players, it's also for staff. So a lot of the S&Cs, the high performance, the football coaches, wellbeing, are also hoping to move through the pathways into the professional field as well. So it's a really good opportunity for them to sort of cut their teeth a little bit in the industry and learn some good life skills.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you've seen kind of it changing throughout the years. Obviously, you've been doing this for some time now, and you've seen that evolution of it now in a place where it's not that kind of tough love coaching so much anymore.
No, well and truly. I went from a college system in the US, and they were very direct and very full on, but it was also you're dealing with sort of different demographics as well. One, they were sort of 18 to 22-year-olds. The demographics that I work in now are sort of that 16 to 19 age group. And even just the day and age of being able to receive strong feedback it's probably changed a little bit. And I think that's, looking at the different Gen Zs, Gen Xs, and how people take feedback on board, I think is really important to understand. We even do the same thing when we're delivering education. We do a lot of infographic PDFs that are just quick little snapshot. This is what instead of trying to send out a 5-page essay, because they won't read it.
Smart.
And it needs to be something snappy and to the point that they get it. Okay, I understand, move on. And then you can give them some additional stuff. And it's the same thing with the feedback, whether that's watching vision, looking behind the goal vision, side on vision, whether that's writing stuff up on a whiteboard, just trying to find different ways of communicating to the athlete so they understand what we're doing and putting it a little bit more positive spin on it.
So you've mentioned communication there and feedback and that kind of respectful relationship between yourself and the athletes. What are the other kind of components of a successful high performance coach, would you say?
I think communication is just paramount, and being able to coach as well and being able to motivate. I sort of, as I said, I worked in the college system, and a lot of time it was 5:30, 6 a.m. in the morning. And if I came in looking a little bit dreary, I had a coffee in my hand, you've got to be able to motivate. You've got to be able to really get your athletes excited to be there. And because some of the stuff some of the running and lifting and or even just the games and can be pretty physically demanding. So you've got to be able to motivate and no, that's right. But it's also understanding the communicating, how to communicate once to the player, to the coaches, to the doctors, the physios. There's so many different variables that you have as a high performance, looking and being able to communicate across all those different spectrums, your point and what you're trying to get across.
So how do you motivate a team who there could possibly be a hangover in the mix? There could be somebody that didn't sleep great. There could be somebody that stuff's going on at home. There could just be, a whole bunch of reasons as to why motivation is slightly lacking among the team. And so how do you rally the troops and get them going?
My wife laughs because she talks to me about my coaching voice, and when I'm at home, because I can get a little bit loud and a little bit excited, a little bit animated. She's like, "Paul, you're at home now, just relax." And so I think it's just not being a wallflower coach. It's really sort of having some energy and getting around the players and celebrating their wins, being passionate about it. And sometimes it might be just finding something different. You've got to understand that it can get monotonous sometimes. So whether it's just changing up a warm up and doing a little relay race, or doing something fun, something engaging, or it might be some music, or just something a little bit upbeat, just to trying to trying to feel that pulse of the athletes in terms of, okay, this is when I need to push, this is when I need to pull a little bit, and just having that awareness.
And so focusing now more on the high performer themselves as opposed to the coach. So what would you say are the characteristics of a high performer? And are there kind of any common traits and behaviors that you see in your most and least successful athletes?
You've got to be highly driven. And even when I talk to AFL recruiters and AFLW recruiters, or when I was working in the US, and you're talking about professional teams that some of them might want to advance onto, is that there's a lot of people that have talent. But talent only takes you so far. It's hard work. It's dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's. It's doing the work when no one else is watching. So it might be doing an extra mobility session. It might be just tightening up on your nutrition. It might be finding a sports psych to help you deal with some anxiety around performance. There's a whole lot of different spectrums. It's the ones that are sponges. You might give them one or two little things and they take it and they run with it, and they take ownership. And I think that's the biggest thing. The ones that have been most successful take ownership of their careers. They don't sit back and wait for it to happen or wait for someone else to make it happen for them. Is that they take ownership.
And then kind of what are the success metrics of your role? So like what does a successful athlete look like? Is it the winning that's important? Like, how do you measure their success?
It depends on what role I'm in. So when I was maybe working in the college system, unfortunately, and even if you're working in the professional system, a metric is going to come down to wins and losses. We could have the least amount of injuries, the best engagement, the happiest team, but if you're not winning, everyone's out the door. I think it's just finding that balance. Now, my current role is all about development. So we don't really care too much about wins and losses. So it's more about stakeholder management. As I mentioned, my life now becomes a lot more just stakeholder management, because I deal with the 18 AFL clubs. I deal with all the states, all the schools and all the programs, and then obviously all the athletes. So it's just a matter of making sure all the fundamentals are there. So if we're talking about in the gym, can they hinge? What are their running mechanics like? What's their core strength like? Do they have the basic fundamentals? How much load do we put in? Have I delivered on all the data that I need to provide for the AFL clubs in terms of their testing data, GPS data, or anything else along those lines? So it's really hard to sort of put a hat on metrics for my current role, but a lot of the time in the professional field, it's going to come down to just wins and losses.
How important is it that the players possess confidence, and is confidence something that can be taught? Yes
and no. I think confidence comes with time and experience. It's like anyone walking into a new job day one. You might be a little bit timid, but once you find your feet and you find where you sit within a team and what your role is, I could walk into a high performance team and my role might be an assistant, and that's fine. I'm comfortable with that. But if I walk into a role and I need to lead, then I'll step up and I'll be the leader of that group. So it really it depends. And the same thing with an athlete. You see it develop over time. And I think it's confidence and arrogance can get confused. You can have some athletes, and some people might accuse them of being arrogant, but I think they're just really confident in what they're doing. And it might say in this football industry, I'm ridiculously confident. Outside of life, I might struggle talking or have social development, or there might be some other anxieties. And a lot of people have these personas and screens up that you just don't know. They might be having this confidence because they've got so many insecurities, and it's just about breaking that down and finding out, okay, where are you coming from? What's your background?
Because it's a fine line, isn't it? Fine line between confidence and ego. And if a player was kind of, I guess, slightly more timid coming in, and you really want to kind of build them up and use tactics and techniques to really get them to a place where they're confident and like believing in themselves and therefore performing better. But then it's like, how far do you go before you turn them into a little monster and their ego takes hold? It's a very, based on the conversation we've had so far, it's such an interesting human-based role. And you just have to be so acutely aware of all of the nuances to different human behavior and human strengths and weaknesses. What are the things that you like the most and least about your role? Like, what are the most challenging things and the kind of best things about it?
Oh, look, I really enjoy my role and all the challenges. Obviously, the last 12, 18 months, because we've had to cancel so many things and telling the players that we're cancelling a camp or we're cancelling games, that's been really difficult. And sort of it's been a double-edged sword. I am a planner. I like as a coach and a scientist, I like everything mapped out. I like everything that I know what's going on, and I want to try and control as many of the controllables as I can. The last 12, 18 months, you haven't been able to control anything. And it's been frustrating, but what it's allowed me to do is be a lot more flexible and a lot more adaptable. So a lot of time is, and again, because I'm a planner now, that I'll come up with a plan A, B, C, D. And so when things do go sideways, I can cope with it. So that's sort of been the challenge in this role in terms of how you do it. And probably the bit that I've missed is a little bit of that interaction, the face-to-face with all these national athletes, where we normally bring them in for camps and games and different things like that, where we've had to do a lot of things remotely online, and that's been a bit of a challenge. But you got to take the best interest of the players and put that, and that's always any decision that we have as a talent department, is what's in the best interest of the players.
How would this fall into being in the best interest of the player? So, you've done all your kind of assessments and your tests and your profiling, and a player's coming through and he's good, but he would be better suited to maybe in other sports, maybe it's another career or profession entirely. How do you navigate that situation? Would you guide them into the place where you think that they should be, or do you try and build them up into the person that you want them to be for this team?
Geez, that's a tricky one. Part of that is part of the philosophy of the AFL is we want to be the number one sport in the country. So we want to attract the best athletes from other sports. So I'm going to have that lens on a little bit and say, look, we're going to do whatever we can to develop some of those players. And it depends on what their physical attributes are. But I think that we usually try and be realistic with the players and manage their expectations, that there's no golden tickets to make it to the professional level, which is what everyone has a desire to do. We'll give you all the tools to hopefully make you successful to get to that level or be a local footballer or whatever that might be. But it's also working with them what plan B might be. And then if they don't make it to that level, we put some support mechanisms around them and discuss what plan B is and how they might be able to still achieve their goal, which is it may not be the most direct way of doing it. So I think that's sort of the way that we sort of, or the way that my team sort of looks at it.
So we've kind of broadly spoken about what high performance coaching is and the principles. I'd like to kind of have a look at which of these principles can be applied like outside of a sporting context. So in your opinion, how much of what you do is transferable outside of a sporting context?
No, it's a really good question. And one of the ones we used to have with our athletes a lot when I was in the US is that a lot of time when they're going for job interviews post their college career, a lot of big companies used to take college athletes because they were so well organized and driven. So to be a college athlete or to be any athlete around the world, you've got to be really good at time management, because a lot of time you might be training in the morning, training in the afternoon, then you've got to manage all your meals or your rehab, your recovery, and then you've got to be able to study on top of that. Whereas a regular university student might be getting up at 10, going to a couple of classes, going back, having a nap, going out and drink. So I think those life skills that you get as being an athlete in terms of time management, prioritizing, and that's a big thing, and that's what some people find hard, being able to multitask and have so many balls in the air. Sometimes you've got to prioritize on those. You don't let the balls drop, but just finding that balance. And I think that's where athletes, hopefully just going through the system, will have that balance. And then also all the education that we put in place. A lot of the time if they're a good athlete, there might be articles written about them and social media, and so putting some structures and processes around them, how they deal with fame or how to block out negative articles and different things like that.
How do you effectively time manage? Because this is something, and I probably shouldn't admit to this because I'm 30 years old and I should be able to manage my time better, but I still find myself kind of falling into the same old traps of not being able to, feeling like I'm always running out of time when really I'm just probably not being as efficient as I should be.
It is a challenging one, but it's sometimes it's just about structure, and sometimes as an athlete you have a lot of structure around you because you know exactly what time you've got to be training, what time you've got to be in the training room, what time you've got to have a meal, and just getting used to putting those schedules in. So you've almost got to, okay, I've got an exam, I've got to make sure I put 3 or 4 hours away, or I've got a project that's due in 2 weeks. I need to make sure I get that on because I've got a big swim meet or soccer game or whatever that might be. just putting that, and just that time management, and whether that's just keeping a diary or a calendar or whatever that might be, just to sort of plan, and teaching those athletes and those student athletes about planning and structuring all of that. It's probably the biggest thing. And hopefully those life skills carry on to post sporting career. Sometimes it doesn't, but I was a swimmer growing up, and I was training 14 times a week while I was still in school. So
Yeah, wow.
I learned very quickly about time management.
Yeah, okay. So I think that the trick here is we all need to start our careers as athletes, and then we'll be able to effectively time manage. I'm afraid I might have missed the boat on that one, Paul.
not necessarily, but they're just intangibles. It's just about having a schedule and a bit of a routine. Yeah. And it's even the same thing of, I hear a lot of people saying, I don't have time to work out, I'm too busy. I'm like, well, just all you got to do is just schedule it in like a meeting to say, okay, at 6:00 on Tuesday, I'm just going to blank this out on my calendar, and that's when I'm going to go and have a little bit of me time and find a way to whether that's running, lifting, whatever that might be, just to work out.
Time boxing, I guess, and prioritizing. And also, I think like with working out, I think it's always, it's seen as one of those things there's a lot of resistance to. But I've always been a very active person, and I think it's just all about finding what works for you. So, there's so many different types of activity, and it's just, actually finding different things that suit your lifestyle and the way that you operate and the way that your body moves, and just coming into relationship with your body and understanding what it is that it needs. I think that might be a reason that people do struggle, is because they're not really aware of what their strengths and weaknesses are, or what it is that makes them tick. How do you go about finding that out with the athletes?
As a part of the draft combine, there's 5 psychometric testing that are done that are delivered to the AFL clubs, and it's the sports psychologists at each of those AFL clubs will analyse learning, reasoning and data, competitiveness, and they can come up with a profile. And some of that is just how to approach the player in terms of them. You might want really direct feedback, or what is your cognitive ability. You may struggle a little bit with your language skills, so instead of giving you a written report, it might be watching videos or doing different things like that. So the clubs spend a lot of time looking into those, but it's also just the art of coaching and getting to know your athletes a little bit, how to sort of find that balance and finding out, it's again, trying to break some of that monotony up and having some fun occasionally. And that's the same as your workouts. There's days where, I like to lift and I'm pretty regular in the gym, but there's days where I just don't have the motivation. So it might be going for a run or going for a kick with the kids, or trying to go for a surf, or trying to find something a little bit different. And it's when you finish the workout and you get those endorphins through your body, you're like, oh, well, this is why I was doing it. So
reminding yourself
it can be challenging. Exactly.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter what level you're at. Sometimes everyone has bad days. I always say that a bad workout's still a workout. At least you've got up and you've done something. So
definitely. They always say that putting on your activewear is the hardest part, but it's a step
rolling
in the right
out of
direction.
bed sometimes. That's right. Trying to find that motivation early in the morning when it's cold outside. But once you do it, you feel really good about it.
Yeah. And I think momentum has a lot to play in kind of productivity and, making progress with things. I think that's probably another thing that during the pandemic, it's really impacted our kind of overall, I guess, collective performance, because the routine is off. We're kind of quite stagnant. We're in the same place. We're not feeling inspired. We're not around people who we get our energy from.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Was a routine. It's we talked about the time management and having that every Tuesday you work out. Your body just gets used to doing those things when you're in that routine. And I think that's been the hardest thing, is not having a routine. And if you're someone that goes to the gym and everything's closed, it's trying to get back into that and going through that process of being sore again. And
any tips as to how they manage to kind of maintain a level of productivity and performance, especially when we're all still working from home? It's not the most inspiring. It's all quite same. So how do you keep motivated and keep the momentum going?
Look, it really depends on a little bit of the individual. So there's some different ways of doing it. It might be as simple as just having a workout calendar and you put a star on it each time you do it, and then you sort of look at it, and you might have a little reward calendar for it. I had my kids they probably spend a lot more time. I got two young boys, but a lot more time on the Xbox or on their iPads, because it was the only way they could interact with their friends. But to earn tech time, they had to do some type of physical activity, whether it was shoot 100 baskets, whether it was do a couple of push-ups or pull-ups, just trying to find what that motivation is. With some of our athletes, we set them some challenges, and then they either posted it on a little WhatsApp group, or they called someone up and say, okay, what did you run today for your 2K time trial, or something like that, just to get a little bit of competition involved in it as well. So it's just trying to find different ways of doing it, and finding out what motivates you, I think, is really important.
That's all very tangible tips. And yeah, it's nice to kind of incentivize the kids to do something that they like but also kind of in parallel building in like a really positive habit. So I think that's a pretty good tip, and I'm sure one that adults can adopt as well. A little reward always goes a long way.
I've done enough exercise today. I can have my glass of wine tonight. That's what it might be.
That's the adult equivalent, right? Paul, we're just coming into the last little bit of the show. So I guess just to round out the conversation, what is the kind of the top tip that you can provide us with to build a high performance mindset, or to kind of set us up to live a high performance life in 2022?
It's like, how long is a piece of rope? No, it's a challenging one. I think you got to find out what you're passionate about. You got to set yourself some goals and then work towards those goals. And whether that's might be as just walking for 20 minutes, whether it's running for 20 minutes or doing a certain amount of exercise. I think life's about balance. I enjoy working out. I also enjoy eating. So it's just trying to find that balance and finding out what it is. But I think it's setting goals, setting a schedule, and just keeping yourself accountable to it, I think, is probably that mindset. And there's times where you need to sort of you shut down and have a little bit of me time, and whether that's meditating, whether it's listening to music, whether it's going for a surf or a hike, or finding out what your little ad is, just to cope with the stresses of the world, but also get some physical enrichment from it as well.
Wow. Well, that didn't seem like it was challenging for you to answer at all. That was a perfect answer. And actually, I could
have gone a soapbox and gone forever. I try to make it succinct.
So I always end the show by asking all of my guests the same set of questions, and I look for a response in like a word or a sentence, or just, we like to keep it pretty pithy. It doesn't need to be anything deep and profound. Try and keep tangents to a minimum on this one.
Okay.
Are you up for it?
Sure, fire away.
Great. So first question, what's the best and worst advice you've been given?
Best advice would be just coach. Meaning that it doesn't matter what level, whether it's amateur, mum or dad at a gym, it's just getting in there, coaching, learning how to coach and how to communicate. Worst advice, I don't know. I think I filtered all the bad advice out over the years. Yeah.
Okay. What's the biggest lesson that you've learned?
Probably as a coach, I want to be respected rather than being liked. I don't need to be everyone's friend, but I want to be respected. And that's probably the biggest take home for me.
Who or what inspires you the most?
I'm going to try not to go off on a tangent. There's a lot of, I find inspiration everywhere. I think the athletes, I'd get just as excited for an athlete that may not have won a championship, that has just set a big personal record, that have overcome obstacles. I think I get a little bit emotional on those, and sometimes the ones that have win national championships and whatnot. So I'd have to say probably athletes. What's
your daily well-being routine?
Look, it varies. I like to do just some type of exercise, whether it's taking the dog for a walk, whether it's a lift. I love surfing, although I don't live close enough to the beach. I think for me, it's a physical activity so I get those endorphins released. Otherwise, it's just hanging out with the family and the kids, finding some type of engagement. Like I said, I've got 2 young boys, and I just sort of make sure I actually embrace them and put the phone down, which I don't do a good enough job of sometimes, but put the phone down and be engaged with them, I think is important.
Great. And then finally, what does being mean to you?
Just living, just being positive and embracing life.
Love that. Paul Sealey, thank you so much. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. There's a whole lot of really applicable, tangible insights in this conversation, and I've really enjoyed it. So thank you very much for joining me.
My pleasure.
You'll have to pass along my best to Suzanne, because she is the kind of orchestrator of this meet.
I'll make sure I pass on your regards.
Wonderful. All right, Paul, it was great to speak with you. Take care.
Thank you.